So I did a lot of research. I went further down this rabbit hole of brain health and mood health than I had ever done before. And what I ended up finding was a really fantastic holistic doctor in Los Angeles. And I went to him. And what I learned was some really interesting things on the way to that process of working with him. That the loneliness that I felt, the isolation that I felt, the shame and the guilt of how could I be depressed? Who am I to be depressed? What right do I have to feel this way? So much negative emotion that I was holding on to around this, which was my ego preventing me from getting support and asking for help. I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way, but maybe there's something you're holding on to, right, that you feel shame around, or you feel guilt, like, who am I to feel so bad? My life is amazing. Why don't I feel better? There were so many versions of that in my head that I simply couldn't reach out and ask. So it was this point of like, I know I'm not alone, because there's almost 16 million Americans who've suffered from some form of clinical depression. It's a massive number of people. 1 in 10 Americans ages 12 and older take pharmaceutical antidepressants daily. Depression affects a quarter of American women in their 40s and 50s. 23% of those women aged 40 to 59 take antidepressants. And here's the most interesting statistic to me. 14% of Americans who take antidepressants have done so for more than 10 years. So if antidepressants are supposed to make us less depressed, why are we on them for a decade or more? And as I was doing my own research, I thought, well, if there's all these people on these antidepressants, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, why are people on them for decades, right? So I went into a little bit of research about neurotransmitters and what these SSRIs are doing. So in essence, okay, because I'm not a scientist and I don't like scientific lingo that much, I like to distill things into their simplest form, is that SSRIs are basically depressing the action in your receptor sites for serotonin. So this is akin to this analogy. This is what I think, is it's almost if you were needing oxygen, okay, and someone's got you in a chokehold and they're like, do you need oxygen? Do you need to breathe? Okay, here's some oxygen. Right? So SSRIs are not a healing mechanism. They are actually mitigating the effect of your neurotransmitters to make its own serotonin. Does that make sense? So we can extrapolate the pharmaceutical industry on a massive scale here, saying that you have, multi-billion-dollar industry here that's not really interested in healing. It's interested in Band-Aid approaches. So in the research I did, with Dr. Green giving me that option of Western prescription versus Eastern healing, I thought, okay, I looked at some family members of mine and certain clients that I had had who had been on SSRIs for years, and they were still battling depression. And I actually looked at the archetype of a close family member of mine who started off for about a decade on SSRIs. She was part of that statistic. But she realized that when she went off of the SSRIs she was on, she wanted to commit suicide again. Right? So we go back to this is a Band-Aid approach that is not an effective long-term healing solution. If you look at the suicide rates, which I did not put on that slide, there are massive suicide rates for people who are on these prescription meds. So if they're supposed to prevent you from taking your own life, why are people taking their own life when they get off these meds? It doesn't make any sense. So what I see is, and again, I'm not up here to bash Western medicine. I'm not up here to bash pharma. But what I'm saying is, if you are on or you have decided to go on an SSRI, I feel the healthiest approach is to treat it as a bridge to get to a more holistic approach, which is what my family member did. And what I was considering doing, I didn't do, and I'll get into that in a minute. But using it as a bridge to go into herbal medicine, tonic herbalism, Ayurveda, superfoods, meditation, fitness, a lot of the things I'm going to cover here, which are more sustainable solutions for your long-term brain health and your mood. So just really quickly, neurotransmitters. We're going to cover the big ones right here. They're divided into two categories. There's inhibitory neurotransmitters, and there's excitatory. Inhibitory neurotransmitters do not directly stimulate the brain. They're more like used for regulation of the excitatory transmitters. So serotonin, which regulates your mood, happiness. That's why SSRIs are so popular, guys, because that's the neurotransmitter that makes you feel good, right? Makes you want to, go up and dance all night with David Wolf on the drums, right? You got good serotonin, you're feeling good. You've got GABA, which helps to coordinate vision and motor function, dopamine for memory and sex drive. And then we've got our excitatory neurotransmitters, right? We've got dopamine for brain focus. We've got norepinephrine for stimulation and epinephrine for stress and blood pressure. So neurotransmitters are basically regulating a lot of our body's processes. So it was interesting when I got my evaluation, which I'll go into later, that the factors that were causing my neurotransmitter depletion, and the big ones were basically prolonged unabated stress, right? Again, ego. I was like, I don't need to sleep that much. I don't need to work out. I eat vegan, I eat raw, I eat superfoods. I was so focused on just the food element alone that I was ignoring all of these other aspects of my life that needed attention, completely ignoring my spiritual life. Not meditating, not taking any time for myself. I don't know if you guys relate to this, but those points in your life where you're just giving. You know, you're focusing on making money, you're focusing on your career, your family, but the person you need to be focusing on isn't getting enough attention, right? So for me, it was the constant unabated stress and anxiety. It was the suboptimal nutrition, which I'll get into later. There were specific nutrients that I realized I was deficient in. There were genetic factors. I had actually some genetic testing realizing that certain things like folate, for example, right? I realized through the tests that I had done, which I'll tell you about in a minute, is that my body could not extract and use folate from food sources efficiently. I was very, very folate deficient. How would I know that without actually getting tested, right? And then disintegration. There's a concept of disintegration, and I'll cover it very briefly because I could do a whole hour on this, where maybe you can relate to this. There's a certain challenge you have in your life. You have the biggest meeting of work, right? You come out in the morning, the tire is flat on your car. And you have two ways of responding to that. You can stay integrated, which is, okay, the tire's flat. Okay, I got the biggest meeting. I'm asking for the biggest raise in my life. What can I do? Okay, I don't have a spare. Okay, my wife's gone with the car. Okay, I'm going to call an Uber, right? Boom. Get to work, you're done. A person who allows disintegration in their life is someone who sees that flat tire and they have a meltdown. Oh my God, the tire's flat. How am I going to get there? It's 25 minutes to work. The Uber's not coming. Why is the Uber here? Oh my God, you know this place where you just start disintegrating and going crazy, and you forget the most important part was not the tire. It was staying focused on getting to work to get the raise. So if we allow this disintegration process in our life, which is basically response versus reaction, that can also have massive, massive impact on our mood and our brain health. So here's one thing I want to stress, in my opinion, in my research. There's a lot of natural products out there that are under the guise of being a mood balancer or a brain booster, right? You might have seen those formulas where it's like mood balancing formula or brain health, which are great in their intention. But here's the thing. If you don't know and you don't have a snapshot of your individual brain chemistry, and you don't have a snapshot of your individual genetic factors and what nutrients you may or may not be deficient in, it's kind of like this: tying a blindfold on and trying to hit a bullseye on a dartboard. And you end up spending all this money and all this time not really knowing exactly what your body needs. Does that make sense? Yes. We've all done it. I mean, well, maybe it could be, I don't know, B9, maybe it could be selenium, maybe it could be tryptophan, I don't know. Let me just spend thousands of dollars just throwing darts at a dartboard with a blindfold on. And I'll get into how and what I feel is the best way to get an accurate snapshot of your neurotransmitter function and what's going on with your body. We'll get to that in a minute.